Hi, my name is Madeline, in case you're new here, and welcome to my channel. A special follower of mine requested if I could go back and show how I made my joints for my doll. Oh, you know who you are. But keep in mind, I'm no expert. I'm just gonna try my best and explain what I did. And let's get started. So here are the materials I used for my doll. I used this FIMO polymer clay. I got myself some magnets so I was able to see what size for the joints I need to go, and also a hand Dremel. I followed along a series on YouTube of an artist showing how they made a doll. I slowed it down to 0.25, mimic it as best as I could. Looking back, I should have worked more in layers, more baked layers. I only had the layer underneath of the amateur, the really thin layer, and I should have baked in between because every time I put her down, either her backside or her front side got all flat. And I did so much, it was so hard to mold the front and the back, and every time I turned her, she was flat. So, little tip, bake more layers in between. Also, the placement of the arms is too low, so it was a little hard getting into those armpits areas, and it was a little harder for later cutting it. So I suggest to you to make the angle a little bit more spread out from the body. Here she is, baking the second time. And yes, she was very hot. Depending on how thick the layer of the polymer clay is, I baked her for 30 minutes. My sister was my hero, and she took over and sanded her a little bit flat. And after the base was done, she ended up looking like this. Oh boy. Okay, disclaimer, I'm no professional. This is my first doll. I just did my research and I just watched a ton of YouTube videos, and this is just my process of how it ended up working for me. It might work different for you, and there are different ways of making these joints. So just putting it out there. And also, this is not a kid's hobby because injuries do happen. Go forward with caution when cutting apart a BJD and hollowing her out. So back to the doll. I marked with a pencil the lines where I wanted to cut her apart. I'm turning her around to see if the lines are blind, if it looks straight, before moving on or making little corrections with my pencil. Also very handy, this is how I measured the distance on the shoulders to have it even. Ooh, cutting her apart. I sat there for literally 10 minutes being anxious about cutting her. And I did not know cutting through polymer clay was that hard. I later figured out that when she's a little bit warm from the oven, she's actually way easier to cut apart. But yeah, no, I had to struggle through the hard layers of polymer clay. And this is how she ended up looking after her arms and her legs were cut off. And as I was moving along with my doll, I always tried to get as much aluminum foil out of her as I could. I straightened out the lines a little better on the legs and put them on top of each other like this to see if there were any adjustments to be made. Here you can see me carving away to make them more round. Using my circle ruler, I checked if the thigh hole was round enough, if I needed to make it rounder, and also measure it to see what kind of ball size I need to put into the thigh. Checking if the legs were the same length, and off we go to make the ball joints. After shaping down both thighs and having a specific size, I made an aluminum ball that would fit perfectly into it, and taking a blob of polymer clay like so, I wrapped the polymer clay around the aluminum foil, shaping it a little bit. And it's really hard to describe this process, but I kept going back to the ruler and squeezing it in to see how much extra would squeeze out on the sides, and shaping it and shaving it down to a specific size and making the ball as round as I could. I know this is a really poor explanation, it's just really hard to describe. I hope watching it kind of makes sense. So if you still need a better explanation, just ask me in the comments and I'm gonna try to explain it as good as I can. After I was happy with that, put a little bit of mineral oil into my hand and rolled the ball in it. For this part, I used a little smaller spear and rolled it in it so that the shape would get really round. And repeating this rolling method till I was happy with the shape. Placing both thighs on top of each other, I marked the halfway point on the center front and the center back of the thigh. About halfway between those two marks that I made, I went down about a centimeter, making this little kind of straight rounded line. Oh, that makes no sense. But it's basically the part that you cut away. On top of it where you didn't cut it, you place the ball joint. It's underneath the crotch, so you can move it back and forth the leg. I hope you kind of understand what I'm trying to say. Like I said, this is not a tutorial, or it's just my process. And this is how it should look at the end. Well, minus the crack. And here you should have the shoulder and the thigh joints in the oven. And here comes the dangerous part of carving away some space for the balls to fit in at the shoulders and at the thigh. I marked the shoulder joint like this so I could orientate myself better so that the ball would sit straight into the shoulder socket at the end. It was a little bit of a back and forth at this point because the shoulder wasn't really rounded the way I shaped it, so I had to shave away a lot to fit the little ball perfectly into it. I didn't show this on screen, but you also have to hollow out where the ball joint goes in on the shoulders. And at the end, it should look somewhat like this. This is pre-oven. It was a little bit easier to form the polymer clay around it by using mineral oils to soften up the clay. And off into the oven they go once again. And here comes the fun part! Yay! More carving and more cutting. So this part actually has to go because this is where the ball joint has to fit in. So you just have to cut it away. And here my crotch piece fell off. I was so upset, but this is the nice thing about polymer clay. You can always fix it. And this is pre-oven, and I reconstructed the crotch and shaped out the butt a little bit better. For this clip, I actually have one later on in the video where you can see it a little bit better, but this is the part where you put the polymer clay into the sockets so that the ball joint can move around in it way better. Basically is you make a little sausage out of polymer clay. It's a softened up version of the polymer clay because you added mineral oil to it. Then you place it around the socket, the hole, and press it in a little bit. Taking the joint, the ball joint, it doesn't matter if it's the shoulder joint or the thigh joint or the ankle, or you use the technique on all the joints, but you have the joint, it's wrapped up in saran wrap, and then you press it gently in there and gently pulling the joint out again. I do not recommend doing this without the saran wrap because this happened that I did it and I accidentally pulled out all the clay again, so I had to redo it. Because my doll has a torso joint, I just had to cut along the marked line that I made of her rib cage. I ended up with a little V and I cut it straight off and preparing for the ball joint that ends up on it. This little ball is just a mock-up ball. It was way too big and it was very poorly made. I carved away on the insides, so I was able to measure it nicely and make the perfect sized ball joint for it, which was just cutting the ball in half. With softened up polymer clay, I placed the ball joint on top of the lower piece, which ends up making the torso move. I also started prepping the neck and the head joint. For the head joint, I just carved away the space that I needed to place the neck ball joint into it. And I use the same technique that I use for the arms and the legs and so on for making this part work at the end with the ball joint. On the arms, I just cut off the ends, also measured them, and went back to my legs after they were baked with the ball joints and marked where I wanted to have my knees. For cutting away the knees, I marked where I want to have my knees or how I wanted to have my knees. I went with kneecaps, by the way. After struggling to get the knee off, I had to go and hollow out where the knee ball joints at the end go. Like I said, this is not a hobby for kids. This is where I broke through and actually injured myself. One of the many injuries. Had everything prepped and hollowed out, I continued on to making the elbow joints, the knee joints, the wrist joints, and the ankle joints, which ended up looking like this. This is the torso joint I was talking about earlier, cutting it in half and embedding it like this. And here's me playing around with the little knee joint. The knee joint was made by hollowing it out, cutting the back side of it off, and placing the two ball joints in it. And here you can see what I was talking about earlier. You take the softened up polymer clay, and that is shaped in a little sausage, kind of wrap it in like that. Wrapping your ball joints into saran wrap and squeezing in the ball to give it the nice shape underneath. If there's no hole underneath because it was squeezed shut, you can use a little plier to get the little hole back. I mean, you can also hand drill it in later, but this is easier. And you continue on doing this technique for all of the joints. Here you can actually see me following along on the video, and this is real time, so you can kind of see I slowed it down a lot, and I also accidentally broke the knees in half when I carved it out, so this was the perfect time of fixing it. And here, once again, for good measures, the little ankle joints of how I made him. And you do the same thing for the wrist joints. And I ended up with joints like these. because I went with magnetic hands, it's basically I just added a little bit of clay and tried to cut out where the magnet goes at the end. Yay, it fits! It looks so good! I have to do that over for the feet. But I did it a little bit different for the feet. I actually constructed it as a solid and I just used my hand Dremel to make little holes where I was able to put in the magnets at the end. And we have joins! What do you think? I'm not very eloquent with words, so I hope you could still follow along. If there are any things that are still unclear, type it in the comment section and I'm going to try my best to answer your questions as a non-expert. And hopefully also with part 2 to this. Anyways, hope to see you soon in my next video and love you lots and have a magical day. Bye bye!